right, people, welcome back to your financial apocalypse update, and we've got a lot to discuss today. The United States and China are competing in Latin America for influence. It is an affluent region with many resources. Now, the United States wants to reshore their businesses at home, and they recognize they have been ignoring nations like Brazil and Argentina for far too long. What brought them to this realization? Let me guess, I believe it's China. Then we see bond prices begin to fall over the world. Yields are skyrocketing, and central banks are starting to fear. But first, consider the ongoing economic conflict in Latin America. Chancay, the US trade representative, is in São Paulo, Brazil, and she has a message for the people there. Consider the risks associated with China's Belt Road Initiative. And this is how the US is attempting to play. Brazil was not even on their radar until China began constructing railways and industries in the nation. The US advises our allies in Brazil to consider the risks in today's economy. Now comes the best part. Sovereignty is something that the US government is attempting to safeguard in the global market. If China's economy is failing, as the Western media claims, why is the United States so concerned about China's presence in Brazil? Why not simply wait for Beijing's financial plans to collapse? Simple. China's presence in Latin America outweighs the United States. The Brazilians realize the advantages of collaborating with China. Brazil's agricultural minister creates a fuss in Washington. He announced that Brazil should join China's Belt and Road Initiative. Guys, 2025 is going to be a year of significant uncertainty. The US is threatening a global trade war, and the EU is imposing protectionist measures. China is Brazil's largest trading partner. The Chinese purchase a large number of food goods from them. If tariffs rise, that implies the United States and Europe will defend its farmers. Brazilian exports to the West are expected to decline. But there's a silver lining to this from Brazil if they align their economy closer to China. Here's why. When Trump launched his trade war, countries throughout the world retaliated with penalties, costing U.S. farmers more than $27 billion in sales. Guess which nation eliminated the most U.S. wheat and grain imports? It was China, almost 80% down, and approximately $26 billion in commerce lost. Beijing will undoubtedly need to obtain it elsewhere. Moreover, half of China's total imports from Brazil are agricultural. So if you're a Brazilian, you can just read the tea leaves. If the U.S. imposes a 60% tax on China, Beijing would simply shut off U.S. food imports, resulting in a bonanza for Brazilian farmers, whose exports to China might skyrocket overnight. It is critical to understand why the United States is afraid of China's presence in Latin America. The area contains an abundance of rare earth minerals. Argentina has a ton of lithium. Peru and Colombia are also inside the lithium triangle. Brazil has a lot of important reserves as well. They account for 26% of global graphite reserves. Brazil also possesses the 10th largest deposits of rare earth minerals, after only Vietnam and China. This is something that both the United States and China want to ensure. These are critical inputs for key industries like EVs, semiconductors, and solar panels. The United States is practically freaking out right now. The challenge is to trace that history, to ask why we stopped manufacturing rare earths, and why so many of those mines closed. And if you look at the effects of China's trade and industrial policies on the rest of the globe, you'll notice a familiar trend. China understood the importance of rare earths at some time, which I believe was quite wise. And they began producing and selling to the global market at prices we couldn't compete with, and our manufacturers eventually shut down. So China's domination isn't necessarily due to a natural advantage. It's not because they have more rare earths, but rather because they were able to pursue coordinated industrial and trade strategies that allowed them to dominate the market. And here's the problem. What the United States wants opposes reality on the ground. What Brazil requires is development, and China is financing Brazil, supplying money and all investments. They have been in Brazil and Latin America for quite some time, while the United States has disregarded the region. According to Brazil's Development Bank, we must maintain a partnership with China since their competitiveness is unrivaled. To attract investment to Brazil, we need to form partnerships. While the United States is establishing military outposts all over the world, China's strategic focus is on economic architecture. They are constructing railroads, highways, ports, and infrastructure. Does China gain from this? Of course they do. This is not charity. However, countries such as Argentina and Brazil gain more directly. They will be able to increase their trade links with the Chinese economy and the BRICS. After the US elections, President Xi will go to Latin America, where he will launch a megaport in Peru, among other visits. This is one initiative that will transform the area economy. China's Chancay megaport in Peru is a major changer. It allows South American countries to export directly to Asia via the Pacific Ocean. This new approach is more efficient than exporting products to Mexico, which takes 35 days. Goods may reach Shanghai in only 25 days, saving both money and time in global trade. The surrounding nations, notably Chile, Argentina, Bolivia, and Brazil, will gain from this. If the West becomes completely protectionist, they may simply divert commerce to Asia. Brazil has previously planned to export soybeans, maize, and other items through this megaport. More commerce leads to a healthier economy, particularly as we approach the storm in 2025. China's economic development plan is just superior, and they accomplish this without creating a single military installation. At this moment, the United States cannot prevent Brazil from joining China's Belt Road Initiative. They're simply 20 years too late. While the United States is floundering, global central banks, particularly those in the Group of Seven, are also in difficulty. Their economies are faltering, and we are beginning to witness a global bond collapse that is pushing bond rates higher, and the root of this crisis rests, once again, with the United States. The U.S. 10-year yield has surpassed 4.2% for the first time since July. Inflation is on the rise, and market participants are becoming increasingly concerned about budgetary issues. Central banks, like the Federal Reserve, are realizing that they don't truly have power over the free market. Yes, power can reduce Fed funds rates by another 50 basis points. But demand for US Treasuries is determined by the free market, particularly for bonds on the longer end of the yield curve. The Treasury term premium is currently rising back to 2023 highs, implying that bond purchasers are expecting a larger yield for longer-term US Treasuries, such as a 10-year bond. Why is this the case? Simple. Investors expect inflation will rise again. The Middle East and the coming trade war may cause inflation to rise again in the United States. We don't have to look far for this one. Blinken, where is he going? He's flying all the way to the Middle East for his 11th effort at a truce. He's in Saudi Arabia to broker peace, but do we really believe it will work? This is a last-ditch endeavor. If Israel hits Iran and the oil reserves explode, we might witness a ripple effect throughout the Middle East, causing inflation to skyrocket. Another source of concern is the United States budgetary predicament. How much will the United States government spend in the future? Because this will influence the supply of bonds in the market. According to the betting markets, Donald Trump has a 60% chance of winning, with a significant lead over Kamala Harris. The elections are less than 2 weeks away. The market is aware of this, and it is taking into account Trump's budget proposal. How much spelling will Trump do in 2025? The larger it is, the more bonds will enter the market, and as an investor, you will expect a greater yield when purchasing US Treasuries. The CFRB predicts a dismal future. According to the betting markets, Donald Trump has a 60% chance of winning, with a significant lead over Kamala Harris. The elections are less than 2 weeks away. The market is aware of this, and it is taking into account Trump's budget proposal. How much spelling will Trump do in 2025? The larger it is, the more bonds will enter the market. And as an investor, you will expect a greater yield when purchasing US Treasuries. The CFRB predicts a dismal future. The market is fearful of a fiscal explosion. In other words, we're going to face a fiscal storm that will result in a debt tsunami. Not only will spending devalue the dollar, but the US will also add to its debt burden. By 2035, the United States national debt might exceed 125% of GDP. However, if Trump proceeds with his spending plan, this figure will skyrocket. We might witness an average growth of 142% of GDP. If things go insane, the U.S. national debt might reach a whopping 160%. This brings the U.S. closer to default. In the short run, interest payments will also spiral out of control. So investors, we're dealing with a double whammy. U.S. bond issuance will not halt. Rather, it will rise. Trump is also likely to spend more, which will keep inflation high for longer. And that is why bond yields are rising. It's no surprise that central banks throughout the world are starting to worry. They just cannot wait for interest rates in the United States to fall. Earlier this year, the ECB reduced rates for the third time, ahead of the Fed. The EU economy is in danger, and despite the risk of inflation, interest rates must fall. And now, the Bank of Canada is taking action. To ensure a smooth landing, policymakers slashed interest rates by a staggering 50 basis points. In other words, they want to prevent a recession. If it isn't an issue, then why decrease prices in the first place? Canada, like Europe, needs to stimulate their economies since demand is declining. Consumers in Canada are beginning to spend less. In the fourth quarter of this year, actual consumption in the country is predicted to shrink by about 1%. The labor market is sluggish, and younger Canadians are seeing a rise in unemployment. And don't forget about the upcoming trade battle with China. The EU and Canada have confirmed tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. So we should anticipate retribution in 2025, especially if Beijing succeeds to increase its own domestic consumption. Despite the fact that the world economy is in turmoil and fear, the Trump trade war is beginning to worry everyone. The biggest risk, and we must not underestimate it, is a global trade war. This will unleash huge deficit spending while also devastating consumer spending in the United States. During his economic cloud address, Trump presented his ideas, practically all of which are significant deficit builders. We have retribution against unjust countries, which most likely refers to China, rebalancing trade with Europe and Japan, punishing U.S. corporations who move manufacturing elsewhere, strengthening the U.S. military, and restoring America's industrial foundation. All of these activities need a lot of money and increased fiscal spending. However, there are also geopolitical dangers. This trade war will not be resolved in a vacuum. Other countries, if pushed sufficiently, will retaliate. China and perhaps the EU might retaliate with economic sanctions on the United States. They have done it before and can do it again. So this is a really perilous period for the economy, gentlemen. The global debt crisis is set to worsen, but global trade is about to tank as well. But tell me what you think. Will Brazil embrace China, or will they listen to the United States? Will the bond market continue to implode? Please let me know in the comments below. Stay safe, like, and subscribe as we traverse these tumultuous times.